مرحبا ديانا، كيفك؟
منيحة تمام. شو أخبارك بسام؟
ماشي
Nice to
الحال،
see
ماشي
you.
الحال. Great to have you with us, Diana. We are very much looking forward to speaking with you about the five topics that you have selected to address by way of addressing what we have learned about them in the past year of genocide. Your topics in this What Have We Learned series are Israel. You might segue into Zionism a bit. Second, Palestinians. Third, international law. Fourth, Israeli society. And fifth, coexistence. Before I ask you to address these topics, can you just share with us briefly what do you think this moment is about? Where are we in this moment right now?
So first, thank you very much, Bassam, for inviting me. This is a great series. What are we at this moment? You know, I think that if you had asked me 6 months ago, would this genocide have continued and reached the 1 year point? I would have said to you, using my, the academic side of me, saying, no, because there are all these international structures that are in place to prevent genocide and to stop genocide. And now here we are a full year into this. And one of the things that has become very apparent, at least for me, is that yes, these structures are in place, but that there are even greater structures in place that really seek our demise, and that the my initial, looking back at what Israel did in 1948 and being able to get away with it is the same as today, which is that this time they're able to get away with a genocide broadcast live. And as much as we may think that there are international structures, there just aren't any. So for me, it's this idea that I worry all the time about our friends and family in Gaza. I worry all the time about the West Bank. I worry about us here in 48. I worry about us in the Shatat, and how these systems have systematically gone after us in order to try to eviscerate us, and the fact that we are still standing after all of this. So this is where I feel like we're at right now. It's not so much of an analytical framework as much as it is, or an analytical perspective as much as it is more of an emotional one.
Absolutely. And this is actually also quite needed. Diana, we will start with the first topic of your choosing, and that is Israel. If you can share with us in a few minutes, what have we learned about Israel during the past year?
We've learned a few things about Israel. One is that as much as there has always been a claim to be an Israeli left wing, that there is no Israeli left wing. There never has been, and there really never will be. Those people who are the Israeli left are people who have literally left the country, the anti-Zionists who don't want to be part of this any longer. There's a few that still remain, but for the most part, that's one thing that we've learned about the society, is that it's willing to go to extremes, not just to perpetrate, a genocide, but to actually go to extreme lengths to perpetrate genocide, while at the same time appearing that they are the victims. One of the things that's also been very apparent, and this part is important, is that if you look at Israel from the perspective of an Israeli, for Palestinians, it's not a democracy. It's not a democratic society. It's a Jewish state for us, which means that it privileges its Jewish citizens over its Palestinian citizens, and Jewish lives over Palestinian lives. And yet, if you're Jewish Israeli, the democratic structures do work for you. And so we're now seeing a genocide that is being cheered on by these very democratic structures. So we see that there are that there's absolutely no limits, no ends to what Israel is going to do, how it is that they are going to carry out this genocide. The fact that we've seen that they can target schools and hospitals and mosques and churches, even blow up cemeteries. Kids are not off limits. All of these things, it just shows you just how Israelis, how Israel has been able to get away with so much for such a long period of time, so much so that the society is now also adopting these same viewpoints as well. So it's been interesting. Interesting is not the word. It's been disheartening. I don't even know if that's the word. I don't know what the word is, to see how a society that was born through the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, how they have yet to even reckon with what they've done to Palestinians. And instead, the very structures that were put into place have been the very structures that have perpetrated this genocide and have allowed it to continue.
Well, this does actually allow us to segue into the second topic, which is, a very, you know, multi-layered topic, which is the Palestinians. What have we learned during the past year about Palestinians, not least the Palestinians in Gaza, but certainly everywhere in the West Bank and where you live, which is basically 48 Palestine?
What we've learned, Bassam, is that Palestinians are united and yet fragmented. United in that we all fear this same beast called Zionism, united in that we're all facing this same beast called Zionism, but fragmented in so many ways. For example, and because I frequently go to the West Bank and because I live in 48, I can see these different segments of society. And we've seen that, for example, in the West Bank, that depending on the city, some cities have, yes, they've been affected economically, but for the most part, life continues as normal, even though Israel's perpetrating genocide 100 kilometers away. I'm talking specifically about Ramallah. We've also seen that in other cities that there still is resistance that's alive and that is well, and that this resistance is continuing despite the efforts of the Palestinian Authority, not because of it. And then we see inside 48 a completely different reality. People who, on the one hand, were silenced at the early days, but still haven't gone past that silencing. Yes, they've been gone after. Yes, we've seen people like the Israelis go after Jalal Abu Amni, Nader Shalhoub Kevorkian, Mesa Abdel Hadi. These are well-known figures, academics, a singer, and an actress, as well as lawyers and others. But for the most part, it's been we just don't see these massive protests. Yes, they're illegal. Yeah, I mean, I want to be clear in saying it's illegal. And at the same time, it's as though there's nothing that can be done. And I do think that there is a lot that can be done. The fact that we're seeing just this sheer silencing has been mind blowing. I never thought that we would be in this place. The other part of it is that for me, I've seen that these policies of fragmentation that Israel imposed have worked. And what do I mean by that? Most people I know don't know anybody. Most people who are like under the age of 30, let's say, don't know anybody who is from Gaza. And the reason they don't know anybody from Gaza is because of Oslo and because the politics of separation. Most people I know who are under the age of 30 don't know anybody who are living in the West Bank, don't know anybody from Dakhel, from inside, and vice versa. And again, it's these policies of separation. And these policies of separation have made it so that what's happening, yes, it impacts us emotionally, even psychologically, but it seems to be as though it's somehow on the other end of the earth. tying back to the first topic of Israel, what we have seen is that Israel is not stopping just at Gaza, that the targets are all Palestinians, and that the targets are not just all Palestinians, but it's Palestinian cities and towns, with this idea that if you that there are going to be good Palestinians and bad Palestinians. The model of the bad Palestinian is Gaza. The model of the good Palestinian is Ramallah. And slowly but surely, we're seeing Israeli policies that are favoring the quote unquote good Palestinians, i.e., Ramallah, and sending a signal to others, in particular, Jenin, Tul Karim, Tubas, and other places, that you have a choice. You can either be like the good Palestinians, i.e., Ramallah, or you can be like the bad Palestinians. And you know what I'm saying, bad, I'm putting in air quotes, meaning Gaza, and we will deal with you as though you are the bad Palestinians. These are policies that have been in the making for quite some time. And I feel like a year into this genocide, we're seeing all of this really taking shape now.
It merits to say that the framework of good and bad Palestinians has always been used when dealing with the other, notably in the Middle East.
Absolutely.
Mahmoud Mamdani pointed out the good Muslim and the bad Muslim.
Absolutely.
And it's actually a framework that has been used on many other categories, like the good Arab states and the bad Arab states. And good and bad, I'm glad you said that. I don't mean bad or good in the real sense. The good refers to those who are either those who conform or are complicit with U.S. policy or Israeli policy, depending on the topic, and it becomes a conventional wisdom, unfortunately, in those areas. All right, thanks, Diana. I now would like to go to a topic that is very, very close to you, and very much looking forward to hearing your thoughts on international law. You mentioned something already. What have we learned about international law in the past year?
We've learned a lot, actually, about international law in the past year. One is that it's been interesting to see that the global South is using the same tools that the West understands, to try to go after Israel and other countries as well, and that is international law. So for me, it was really fascinating to see the case of South Africa going against Israel, South Africa v. Israel, because because it was, again, like using these tools of international law, which have always been there, by the way, but going after the West. Now, we've also seen the fragility of international law, and it's important to keep in mind that international law, just like any other law, is not created in a vacuum. International law is a reflection of power, and it's a reflection of international power. And so international law has its limits. It always has, it always will. And we've seen its limits in particular when it be spotlighted when it comes to Palestine. How? Despite the fact that we have all these countries, that claim that they support and believe in international law, and I'm talking about the United States and Canada and most of Western Europe, that at the same time, when you get a decision that comes out in the realm of international law by these very institutions that they are talking about, that somehow international law can be avoided, it can be it can be ignored, and it can be dismissed. And that's one thing that has been really, this has been something that we've seen now live. So in the past, where you could have seen it theoretically, when it comes to an actual genocide, we see it live. The other thing that we've learned about international law, look, as whenever you study international law or international human rights law, a lot of the studies about it actually are studies in genocide. You learn about how genocides happen. You learn about the warning signs of genocide. You're taught about you're taught that somehow democracies don't engage in genocide. You're taught about the mechanisms in place to prevent genocide, the mechanisms in place to stop genocide, and all of that has been very academic, because all of these very institutions that are in place to prevent genocide, to stop genocide, don't work when it's when they don't want them to work, and the them being the Western powers that don't want them to work. So we've seen the fragility of international law as well. But another thing we've seen is we've seen how international law can still be a rallying cry for something bigger. When I and others talk about international law and the application of international law, it's not because we believe that international law is going to be the savior. And it's not because we believe solely in a system of international law. We're talking about decolonization, but this is the entry point for us. And it's been and one thing that we have seen over the course of the past year is just how much international law can serve as a tool to get people together, to get them to push, and to have that, to be able to push in a language that Western powers like. And again, this isn't to say that this is the only tool. It's not even to say that it's the best tool. It's just a tool. And so that has been that's been important. Another thing that I think has been important, or what we've learned, is that international law, of course, and we knew this before, but it's become much more apparent. International law is not self-executing, meaning that this isn't just going to be somehow a decision comes from the International Court of Justice, um, or that there are going to be arrest warrants that are going to be issued, and that somehow these things magically happen. No, it's the result of lots of work on the ground. It's the result of a lot of energy, and it's the result of a lot of grassroots activism as well. And so that has also been one of the lessons that we've learned. I think if I were to sum it up in a few words, I would say we've learned that international law is weak. We've learned that international law is the tool of the West. And we've learned that despite that, people are still continuing to push and to hold the world and these war criminals to account.
Yes, there's a lot of discussion about international law, but I feel that we sometimes, go in circles because it's the same discussion always. And
Yeah,
despite the, quote unquote differences among those who critique international law, there hasn't been very much change in the concept that international law is a tool, and some people are, or some groups, actors are able to use this tool better than others based on power and so on. But it doesn't mean that the others, quote unquote, cannot ever use that tool to their advantage. And so it's not as simple, but it's also not too complex.
that's
What do
right. That's right. Yeah.
I appreciate your answer. Um, all right, let's move to a kind of warm topic, which is
Israeli society.
Israeli society, which is a topic that in the past year has been highlighted as quite, quite interesting, based on what people thought they knew, and what they thought, about the
Yeah.
divergence, the plurality, the diversity. We actually saw something very much uh, closer to homogeneous. Nobody can address this better than the people living in that society. And you're one of them. If you can tell us about Israeli society during the past year and what we've learned about it, that would be splendid.
Oh, okay. So what have we learned? Like when I say what have we learned, I'm trying to think of the we. And so I'm going to talk about, I haven't really learned so much about them, but I do want to highlight what I think people didn't know about Israeli society. And the reason I haven't learned so much is because I live here and I've lived here for quite some time. But I'm going to contrast a few things. So first, I don't think that people, when I say people, let me start over again. I don't think that there was a genuine understanding of just how fascist Israeli society is, and just how racist society is, and how much it has spent its entire, this society has dehumanized Palestinians. And so what's been apparent this year, and again, this isn't apparent to me because I'm somebody who lives here and interact with Israelis every day, but I think what has become more known to others is just how fascist, how racist, and how Palestinians are invisible to them. And I want to start by saying the only way that Israel could have been created, the only way that they could have perpetrated the Nakba, was through the dehumanization of Palestinians. And it's that dehumanization that began through with the Zionist movement, that continues to the very day, that has been the thread of Israeli society. And that part is very important to keep in mind. It's not as though, like, you see these things where people say, oh, Israeli society has moved to the right. It's always been right wing. It's always been fascist. It's always been racist. And it's just degrees of the racism and the fascism and how open or not open they are about it. So let me begin. The first is, what we've seen over the course of the past year is that Israelis are totally immune. And in fact, not just immune, they don't care. They genuinely don't care what happens to Palestinians. They don't care what they do to Palestinians. And there's been a few things, Bassam, that have been really, like, some instances this year where it just highlights this. One is we've seen this blowing up of like TikTok stars in Israeli society. And these TikTok stars are not the ones that you're seeing in the West. These are these are TikTok personalities who are based here. The message that they have here is so very different than the message that is sent to the West. The message that they send here is about them being strong, about them being in charge, and about them being fearless. The message that they send to the West is one of victimhood, of we being forced to do this. That is not the message that Israelis project to one another here in this society. So the TikTok stars are people who are soldiers, who do anything that they can to get views, to get likes, to get shares for things like blowing up Palestinian houses, dedicating the blowing up of a Palestinian house or school to their child, writing save the dates inside a Palestinian home before then blowing it up, to then having people who are carpenters, who are soldiers, go into Palestinian homes and analyze what is in these Palestinian homes, wood-wise, carpentry-wise, to then go and break it up, like smash it to pieces. Nowhere in Israeli society, particularly not in the media, have we seen any commentators say, why are you doing that? Like, why are we there? In fact, it's all just a form of cheerleading. Now, I've seen this in the United States as well during the various attacks on Iraq and in other places as well, but primarily in Iraq. But this is totally another level. The soldiers come out feeling very proud, very, very, very strong. Dating apps are showing men wearing their uniforms, and the speak that you hear here is just about how strong they are. That's one level. The other level that we've seen is these riots to literally be able to do anything to Palestinians including torture and including rape. And we've seen a number of these riots of people pushing to be able to rape. They don't want to be held to account at all. And that's why I was saying that the democratic structures don't exist. They completely exist only to serve genocide. Another thing that we have seen is the sadism to which Israeli society wants to see Palestinians suffer. Everything from blocking aid to having these, entertainment to stop aid from getting in. For example, they've put up bouncy castles in front of the various crossing points to prevent trucks from getting into Gaza to be able to deliver much needed supplies. So on each and every level, we've seen a level of sadism, of fascism, of racism, of dehumanization that has always been there, but it's now taken to another level. I also want to talk about the protests that are taking place inside Israel. These are protests that have at some points garnered up to 500,000 people. These protests are not protests because they are anti-war protests, not at all. These are protests simply demanding that Israel strike a deal so that the Israeli captives can be returned, to then just turn around and bomb Gaza again. That's why with the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah just this past week, we didn't see the numbers in being as large, because these are not anti-war protests. These are protests that are simply aimed at saying to Israel, you and to the Israeli government, you failed in this one task. We want to see Israelis come home. That's it. So all in all, it's a society that is racist. It's a society that is fascist. It's a society that's turned so inwards to itself and focused only on itself. They don't care about what they've done to Palestinians. They don't care about the future. They've reconciled themselves that they will forever be living by the sword. And all to say, it's not surprising, because that's the only way that Israel was founded, was through the dehumanization of Palestinians. The only way you can ethnically cleanse a place is to not believe that the people belong and that they are equal and they have a right to be there.
Wow, I have several questions, Diana, but then we will be violating our rule. And you know that we live in a rules based world and we should not do that. Um,
No, violate
لا
the rules.
أعوذ بالله.
You can cut it. You can always cut and like
I'm
add
not
it
gonna
as like
cut
a defense.
anything.
Okay.
لا, thank you so much, Diana. I appreciate the first part very much, where you said who's the we, because people living within Israeli society have known better for quite some time. But even as you said, even then, the degree of, I guess, either, I don't know what it's called, hysteria, fanaticism, this collective noise in the direction of genocide is just unfathomable.
And Bassam, it's on all levels. So when I'm talking about, the structures that are in place in a society, this is on all levels. It's not just the government. It's on the level of the media. It's on the level of the so-called left-wing media. It's on not the alternative or independent media, but the what they call the so-called left-wing media. We have political parties, even the so-called left, like Labor, who is now openly talking about occupying Lebanon. We have a Supreme Court that said it's okay for bodies to be used as bargaining chips, including the body of a Palestinian who holds Israeli citizenship, Walid Dabqa, who died in prison earlier this year. He's still not been able to be buried because the Israelis are using his body as a bargaining chip. And so on all of these levels, like, it's not just, and this part is so important, it's not just on the level of the government. When we talk about incitement to genocide. People looking just at the government level. This is on all levels. This is on the government level. This is on the level of the judiciary. This is on the media level. This is on virtually every level of society that you see this level of dehumanization, incitement to genocide, and glee when it comes to genocide. If they're not inciting, they're gleeful about it. Nobody is looking inward and saying, where are we going as a society? What have we done to Gaza? What does this mean that is going to happen to us in the future? And nobody's really looking beyond, beyond the tomorrow, or even beyond today. And it's just they're being gleeful about the about genocide and about the harm that they've inflicted, because they've always been gleeful about it. And so it doesn't matter if we rape people, it doesn't matter if we torture them, it doesn't matter if we starve them, it doesn't matter if we bomb them. These Palestinians must understand that we were at one point in time victims, and they must come to terms with that, and they must be accepting of their status of living in cages.
And I must say that there's one, well, at least one, but there have been dozens, if not hundreds, of incidents, perhaps thousands, where this was on video, and a Palestinian student who had shown sympathy online with Palestinians in an Israeli school, it was
Yeah.
middle school, maybe high school, but these were young kids. And when she was suspended for showing sympathy, there were cheers and celebrations. And then when her suspension ended and she came back to school, she was maligned in a collective way by almost everyone, at least in the video, to be quite honest and fair, in a way that I think is, and I don't use that language, that I'm not going to even give it a name, that language of disturbing, because it is used by Western media in ways that, make you want to sort of cringe, because certain things are disturbing for them, but the big picture and the worst things are, they don't even mention them in many cases. But it was so disturbing to see at that age the level of hazing and repression by young kids of a person who simply showed sympathy with Palestinians being slaughtered to the tune of tens of thousands of people. That was basically a microcosm of so much of what you shared with us from a young
Yeah.
age. And I, this is a
Yeah.
notable, event.
Look, these are Bassam. Every year there's what they call Jerusalem Day, and what Jerusalem Day, it's got this harmless name called Jerusalem Day. It's actually a celebration of the occupation. It's a celebration of the denial of freedom of millions of Palestinians. And so, and the reason it's called Jerusalem Day is because they call it the day in which Jerusalem was reunited. Well, how is it reunited? By being occupied through the occupation. So they actually are like celebrating the occupation. They're celebrating the denial of freedom. They're celebrating that they've put people in prisons and in cages. And so every year on this day, the people that you see, there'll be buses will bring people to the old city of Jerusalem, and they rampage Jerusalem, especially the old city, doing everything from throwing Israeli flags, spitting on people, to stealing things, and the shopkeepers either just have to stand there or they close down, which is what lately they've been doing. Now, who is doing all of that? It's young people. Israeli society is unlike the rest of the world, where we're seeing trends towards younger people becoming more left wing. In Israeli society, it's the opposite. It's the younger people are much more right wing than their parents and their grandparents, and that's saying a lot because their parents and grandparents are already right wing. These people are even more. And some of the chants some of the things that they sing, and they sing it to Palestinians, like in front of me. I went this year and I was standing in front of them, And they sing things like, "May your village burn," and Ma'in Rabbani, who's also been on Jadaliyya a lot, has said that this is the Israeli national anthem. May your village burn, because we hear it over and over again, and that was exactly the chant that they were chanting. This young 13-year-old girl is "May your village burn." Um, it's a society that it's even beyond hazing. It's that the lesson that she has now learned is, don't you even dare open your mouth, because if you do, we will come after you. And the full weight of your friends, your peers, future your colleagues will come after you. That's exactly what's happened to Palestinians in Israel. The reason that we've seen so much so much silence, or there's been so much silence, is because the people who snitched on all of the students, and had 122 of them face disciplinary action, were their classmates. The people who went after Nader Shalhoub Kevorkian, Professor Nader Shalhoub Kevorkian, who was a professor at the Hebrew University, were her colleagues. The people who've gone after Dalal Abu Amni were people who were in the cultural sphere. And because they couldn't go after Dalal, because they couldn't get to her, because she doesn't work for an Israeli company, she doesn't work with Israelis, they then tried to go after her husband. And so this is a society that is really so focused on having one narrative, and that one narrative is Zionism and the greatness of Zionism, and the acceptance of Zionism. And anybody who is outside of that is considered, as we talked earlier, the bad Arab, the bad Palestinian, and therefore must be dealt with as the bad Arab and the bad Palestinian.
Thanks for that perspective, Diana, and honestly, all power to you, and others who must endure this every day. Let's move to the last topic, which is organically connected to the question of Israeli society, and that is concepts of coexistence and the term coexistence. As broadly or specifically as you like, feel free to take any angle to approach what we have learned during the past year about frameworks that might involve coexistence. And this could actually be past, present, or future.
There is no coexistence, and there will never be coexistence unless we actually go down the path of focusing on decolonization. And what do I mean by that? Yes, Palestinians and Israelis live in the same place. And that's what people like to claim as coexistence, which obviously you and I know is not coexistence. But but that's it. There is no coexisting. There is, we as Palestinians, and I say this all the time, we subexist. It's a Jewish state, as they like to call it. It's a Jewish supremacy state. And it's a state that's based on this idea of them having greater rights, every other person having lesser rights, that our presence is temporary. And if it's not temporary now, it will be temporary in the future for like the next generation. And it's premised on the idea that only Israelis are the ones who can not just have rights, but have any future. For the rest of us, we're just lucky to be around. Now, a lot of the efforts in the past on coexistence have focused on this like very superficial idea that yes, there are Israelis and yes, there are Palestinians and they're living in the same space, but they haven't ever gone past that into looking at, is it true coexistence, and what needs to happen for there to be true coexistence? And that's why I think that if we just take South Africa as a model, and everybody likes to focus on South Africa. If we solely look at South Africa, South Africa did not decolonize. It didn't break down those structures of its colonial past. Quite the opposite. It stuck with it. And that's why today you see South Africa in the way that South Africa is, where it still has a ton of problems. And it will for quite some time, unless they address things like land back, like reparations, like refugees coming back. And so now there is, interestingly, two things have emerged since last year. One is that among Israeli society, this is fascinating. There's been greater talk of the idea of two states. It's fascinating only because for all of these years, it as much as people were talking about two states, etc., they never ever thought about it because they never had to think about it. Now there is some talk, not much, but there is some talk about two states. But more interestingly than that is that now you do see people who are truly coming together and saying, we must focus on decolonization because that's the only way that there is going to be a move forward. As it stands right now, it's, I have to say, Bassam, I have a hard time thinking about what the future is going to hold with me living amongst these people who think that it's okay, and not just okay, that it's cool to carry out genocide. I do. I have a really, it's something that I think about each and every day. And at the same time, I think it's also important to be looking at those people who are working and are focusing on what is needed to decolonize, to make, to fix the evils of Zionism, and to make this into a place where there can be true coexistence based on equality, not based on supremacy. I don't know how successful I don't know how successful any of this is going to be, especially since this has been framed by the Israelis as, for them, an issue, an existential issue, whereas in reality, it's an existential issue for Palestinians. They're trying to eviscerate us, and I fear that they'll succeed. Your daughter is the same age as my son, and I think about them all. I think about this younger generation a lot. I think about the weight that these kids are bearing, the things that they're seeing. Even as much as you try to isolate your daughter and I try to isolate my son, they see and they know and they hear and they know who's doing what. And I don't know if I can do what my parents did. My parents lived in this country in the aftermath of the Nakba. They stayed post 48, and so they had to live with the people who were the ones who had either perpetrated the Nakba, or they were apologists for the Nakba, or they denied the Nakba. And my parents stayed, and I don't know how they had that. I don't know how they had that strength, Bassam. I don't know if I had that strength. And then at the same time, my father was the one who said that he didn't want to have children in this country because he didn't want to put that burden on us. And here I am now living here, and I don't know if my dad was right, or if I don't know if I have put this burden on my son. Um, I don't know. I really don't know.
Well, you handled it exquisitely, and you have been such a source of empowerment for so many people. And at this point, that's what matters, Diana. Thank you so much for your insights and your
Thank you.
personal touch.
Thank
And
you. And you can feel free to cut out the personal touch. I was really just speaking from my,
I'm
you know,
not
because I
I'm not
think,
cutting out anything. Diana, I would like us to talk a little bit for just a minute, actually, about where do you think we are headed before we close?
at this point, it's hard for me to say where I think we're headed. And the reason I think it's hard for me to say is because um, of the events of the past week. The Israelis feel very high. So I don't know when this is good. Recording going to come out, so I'm going to put it in context. So on Saturday, the 28th of September, the Israelis came out and said that there was no way that Nasrallah had survived the massive bombing of Beirut on the 27th of September, where they flattened 6 buildings, killed at least 300 that we know of. The following day, being the 28th, was when Hezbollah confirmed that Nasrallah was killed. The Israelis that evening were on a high, and they were like popping the champagne on TV, and they were cheering one another. But then, of course, we had the ground invasion into Lebanon, and now, of course, the response by Iran, limited, by the way, very limited response by Iran. But the combination of the ground invasion with Israelis coming back in body bags, as predicted, with the Iranian response, has tempered that high that Israelis are feeling. I say this because what I know that Netanyahu has wanted to do all of these months is he wants this to be regional. He wants there to be a regional war because he wants to both assert Israeli supremacy as well as remain in office. It's that simple. And one of the ways that he can remain in office is by having a regional war, because we know that the US will come in and support Israel. That support for something more regional has now diminished. And the reason it's diminished is because the Israelis saw the very limited response by Iran over the course of the past few days. And that has gotten them fearful. So, where do we go from here? I don't think anything is going to change until the US election. In fact, I don't think anything is going to change until and even after the Israeli election, the US election. I don't think that the US election factors one iota into either Israeli thinking or into American thinking. The the only place that I see that things are going to change is when Israel and the United States combine, take a decision that enough is enough. And that's it. And we already know where Israel's taking this. They've made it clear. They made it clear the first week. They made it clear the first week that they want to see Gaza smaller in size, thinner in population. And that's what we're already seeing, a Gaza that's smaller in size, thinner in population. Will there be resistance? Of course, there's going to be resistance. Wherever there's occupation, there's going to be resistance. The bigger question is whether that resistance is going to be enough that it gets Israelis thinking in different terms or not. And to be honest, if this 1 year has shown us anything or taught us anything, is that Israelis are even more entrenched in genocide than they are less entrenched. As I mentioned, there is some talk about 2 states and blah blah, but that's it. It's just talk, and so it's really hard for me to say where we are going because everything can turn overnight, and yet nothing can change as well.
Shukran, Diana. We
Thank you.
all appreciate your
Thank you.
sharing with us all of these insights and feelings. There is a dimension of all of this that has not been as predominant, which is how people are feeling, including children. But
Yeah.
everybody's watching, including children, and it could very well be that this is one of the exits from this context of racism in Palestine, Israel. I have nothing else to say except I really would like to watch this again myself. I know that others will be very much interested in doing the same. Thanks so much again, Diana. And I have very little to say except all power to you and stay as safe as you can.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sam. Thank you. And thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Azisti. Take care of
All
yourself.
right. Bye.